Today is a good day. We're going to be building a reimagined Les Paul, and this is a design that I've been working on for a long time, but I finally landed on something that I'm really happy with. But first, let's have a quick look at the wood, then the design, and then we'll just dive into the build and I'll talk while I work. And I thought today it might be interesting to have a chat through how I approach guitar design. It might help people out there, perhaps that are building their first guitar, to go through everything that you need to think about and consider before you even start looking at the shape and the design of the guitar. Okay, the wood. For the neck, I'm going to use a light piece of sapele, just a single piece neck, with a really beautiful, fairly light zero cote fretboard. And I'm going to use Carina for binding. And for the body, we're going for a matching top and back in Carina. So the main part of the body is going to be single piece Okame, which I use on most of my guitars. This is the Carina that I've selected for the top, which is not crazy highly figured, but what it is really beautiful and intricate in the grain that comes along the side of the guitar. And it's just a really elegant piece of wood, and that's what I'm going for this guitar. And this is the piece that's going on the back, which you might think actually looks more interesting than the piece on the front, but where all of the hardware and everything will sit, this piece definitely works better for the back of the guitar. Let's take a quick look at the design, but I'm not going to talk about it for long because I'm actually going to talk all about guitar design as I work. You'll need to ignore the hardware and the pickups on here because they're not to scale, but that's the concept. I've seen a few guitars with this type of arrangement on the horn and I have liked them, but they can look, it's a really hard design to get right. And I've done so many iterations of this. So this will be a carved top guitar. I'm going to put pretty much symmetrical carves on each side, but I'm completely happy with it and I will talk all about it as we go through the video. So let's get started. Let's get the neck marked up and build a reimagined Les Paul. The first thing really is the scale length, and it is one of the most important determining factors in shaping the overall sound of your guitar. And most people may already know this, but it's really worth understanding if you don't. So the characteristics of the different scale lengths are, all other things being equal, if you were to pop the same pickups and electronics in guitars with different scale lengths, what you would hear is that generally speaking, the longer the scale length, the more low-end definition and clarity you have, the more bite and snap you have, and conversely, the shorter the scale length, the more fuller and warmer the guitar starts to sound. And what that translates to when you start adding gain and really driving the guitar is that you can go from a longer scale length where you have real bite and clarity and snap and definition and real punch, to something that turns into a bit of a snarl and then gets growly and thicker and creamier the shorter the scale length becomes. And that is my really subjective way of describing what happens when you go from a long to a short scale length, but that's the best that I can do it. And the best thing to do is probably to go and have a listen to a Fender, a PRS, a Gibson and a Gretsch that are all driven, because that's the kind of descending order of the standard scale lengths of guitars, and you will fairly quickly hear the different characteristics of the different scale lengths, but that is pretty much how it goes. So it's probably worth having a think at this point about the type of music that you're designing the guitar around. If you're designing, say, a guitar for really high gain metal guitar, there are probably some fairly easy decisions that you can make at this point. And of course, the other really important part of the scale length is how comfortable it is, because even a mediocre guitarist will feel the difference between a Fender and a Gibson scale length guitar in terms of the distance between the frets. So if I'm building for somebody with really small hands and short fingers, or if you're building for yourself and that's what you have, I would always go for a shorter scale length over the sound characteristics of that scale length, because there are a huge number of things that you can do to mitigate and refine that further. None of these things work in isolation, which is one of the things I really love about building guitars, is that you can take each ingredient and add and refine it based on the decision that you made at the last step, and that makes it infinitely changeable and interesting. That does actually bring us nicely onto the next important decision, which is the type of pickups that you use and where you place those in relation to the scale length and what difference that actually makes. So I'll get the neck outline cut and then we'll have a chat about that. Okay, the pickup placement in relation to the scale length. This is one of those topics that I think is a really under discussed topic in our community, but it's the next thing that I consider after the scale length of the guitar because it is a really important part of shaping the overall voice of the guitar. The closer that you place your pickups to the bridge, the brighter they will sound, and the closer they are to the neck, the warmer they will sound. It is the rule. I do appreciate that those are quite subjective terms, but ML Sound Labs have recently done a video where they measured the difference between pickup positions. So what they found was that for every 10 millimeters you move the bridge pickup away from the bridge, you lose about 1.5 decibels at in the upper mids, in that 2200 hertz range, which is a really important frequency for guitar. And what's really great about that is that it actually puts some tangible metrics around the difference that these things make. So, and it gives you the information to make informed decisions about the type of pickups that you want to pop in your guitar. So if you wanted to take a guitar and move your bridge pickup forward 3 or 4 millimeters to warm the overall tone, knowing what that would do to the voice of the guitar gives you the information that you need to choose a set of pickups that are going to work best in that combination, and maybe something that is voiced more towards the upper mids. If you want to actually hear the difference on a guitar, the best one that I have found is the Guitaristas did a review of which, or did a video of which SG Special is right for you, where they took a custom shop Gibson, a standard Gibson, and an Epiphone SG. Now, interestingly enough, the bit that they skipped over in the video was the bit I found the most interesting, which is that all of those guitars have different pickup positions. The standard Gibson, then the custom shop, and then the SG had them incrementally, the bridge pickups incrementally further away from the bridge, but you can really hear in the sound examples the difference in the voice of those guitars. Choosing the type of pickups themselves is definitely the most important part in determining the voice of your guitar, but I won't go over it in a huge amount of detail because I think most people already have a really good understanding of what different pickups sound like. But bright, clear and detailed is really what you'll get from a single coil pickup, with the P90 being slightly rounder, slightly more punchy version of that, but still retaining a lot of the sweetness of the single coil, and then humbuckers being the thickest and warmest and roundest of all. And then the output for those pickups is really what I will use to match to the style of music that's going to be played on the guitar. So the higher the output pickup, the more clarity and definition gets retained as you start adding distortion and gain. So that was probably the quickest and simplest explanation of the most important part of the electric guitar, but I do think that most people already have a pretty good grasp of that. And for me personally, what I'll use as standard on these guitars is that I do tend to stick to lower output and vintage voiced pickups across the board, because what I tend to find is that the more powerful the pickup, the more of that sweetness you lose when it's cleaned up and you're playing clean. Okay, I think we're ready to get this cut down to size now. And actually I think that covers everything that we need to from a sound point of view, from sculpting the actual bass sound of your guitar. So we'll cover a few bits just on the feel of the guitar that we haven't talked about yet, and then we'll get on to designing the rest of the guitar around all of these constraints that we've set out. So obviously there is literally no way that I can explain to you what a comfy feeling neck is. You'll have your own opinions on that, everybody will. But I will share with you what I find to be the most universally comfortable shape. And that is exactly what I'm going to do on this and what I do across all my guitars, in fact, which is somewhere between 20.5 and 21 millimeters thick at the first fret to 23 millimeters thick at the 15th fret with a perfect C-shaped profile. And I also use a 12-inch radius on the fretboard. Okay, I think we're ready for glue up and to move on to designing the aesthetic parts of the guitar, which I love talking about, and we'll also have a chat about things that you need to consider just for the construction method of the guitar. In fact, if I just pop the radius on and the binding, we can have a chat while I'm doing the fret dots. Let's do that. Okay, solid body or semi-hollow guitar. I'm not going to talk about hollow body guitars because I haven't made any hollow body guitars and that's not where my experience is. Personally, if I'm choosing between a solid body and semi-hollow guitar, it's nothing to do with the tone of the guitar when it's plugged in, because I couldn't identify the difference between a solid body and a semi-hollow guitar once they're plugged in if I were to listen to them blind. Now that's not to say that there isn't a difference in tone, it just means that I can't hear it. So if you can, absolutely go with that. I actually prefer making semi-hollow guitars given the choice because there are a few advantages. It gives you the opportunity to use woods that are traditionally much too heavy for solid body electric guitars, and actually that's why Fender initially made the thin line telly. It's because there was a lack of supply of ash that was light enough to use in their solid body Telecasters. It also opens up some design possibilities for creating really interesting sound holes, and I really like that. And they do sound much nicer unplugged, and I quite often will just pick up a guitar, sit away, noodling away on the couch without it plugged in. And I love the sound, that acoustic property of a semi-hollow guitar. So those are really the reasons that I would pick a semi-hollow over a solid body if I wanted to do it that way. What you also have is obviously the opportunity to chamber your guitar if you wanted to use some interesting but traditionally very heavy woods. You can still do that on a solid body and just chamber it. So far as the structural strength of the guitar is concerned, I think that there is really only one part that is the potential point of failure, and one really important thing that I focus on, and that is where and how the neck attaches to the body. From a maker's perspective, it is no more easy or difficult to do a bolt-on or a set neck pocket. They both have to be cut with equal precision. The only difference being that with a set neck you have the opportunity to carve in a seamless transition between the neck and the body, and that's actually something that I really like to do these days. So from a woodworking and an aesthetic point of view, I prefer to do set necks these days, but that's the reasons why. It's nothing to do with tone. What is much more important than which type of attachment method you choose is how solid that neck pocket is. Typically 8-gauge strings will have about 70 pounds of static force trying to fold the thing up, whereas 13-gauge strings will have about 180. So that gives you some idea of the forces at play depending on the type of strings. There are no industry standards for, you know, the size and surface area of a neck pocket, but one thing that I did decide was that I'm not going to be the guy to prove that a 1-inch neck pocket can work and last a long time. I want to actually go overkill, if anything, on the neck pocket. So I'll always, for set necks, I will take the heel of the neck right into and almost to the end of the neck pickup cavity, just to be safe. And for a bolt-on, I tend to always use 4 bolts if I'm doing a bolt-on rather than 3, but I wouldn't go any less than 3. That's just my opinion. We are ready for frets. I'm going to get those popped in, and then we're going to have a talk about the aesthetics and design of the guitar and the body and the headstock and stuff. So that's going to be cool. Okay, that's as far as I'm going to take the neck until we have the body done, which we're going to start now. So let's pop that aside. It is just worth saying at this point that the rest of the video is just my own observations and opinions on how to come up with a really nice looking guitar shape. So I certainly don't consider myself an expert on guitar design, but I'll go through my own thoughts and experience and share that, and perhaps it might help people with a bit less experience. Let's get this marked up and I'll talk as I work. A couple of basic tips first. For the overall size of the body, I'll try to work within a rectangle of 34 centimeters wide by 47 centimeters long. And that's because the tops, guitar tops that you will get, the body blanks that you will get, and also guitar cases will accommodate up to that size without any issues. You probably won't have to worry about the size of the guitar. Once you get beyond that, you start having to think about those kind of things. So it's an easy constraint to stick within if you can. Also, I design everything on Inkscape now, which is a free program. It's super easy to learn and to use. So I would really highly recommend getting that. And what I'll do is everything that I've mentioned in this video, I'll pop the links to everything in the description. And the third tip is that I make a template for everything. Even if I'm only going to be doing a one-off guitar, I'll do a template for it, because as soon as you translate something from 2D into 3D and then pop it onto even a 6mm piece of MDF like this, you can see instantly whether you need to tweak or change anything. And it's funny it's funny how that happens, but you'll probably be surprised at the amount of times you do need to change something. Let's get this one cut, pop the top and back on, and then I'll give you my rules for how to come up with a really nice balanced design. If I'm going to design an offset guitar, there's a couple of things that I will make sure I do, because I found that it's really hard to design offset guitars. They can look really awkward. So the first thing I'll do is to make sure I design it on its side, and I'll use a couple of parallel lines just to make sure that the body shape has a nice balanced feel to it. That's the most important thing, I think, for getting those type of shapes right. And if it's a double cutaway, then I will make sure that the cutaway from the top horn flows into the bottom, and I'll do that for any double cutaways. And for anything that I design, what I'll also do is to make sure that whether it's a double or single cut, the outside edges of the top horns here, or the shoulders, are exactly the same distance from the center line of the guitar. What I have found is that if you really want something to feel classic, then a round belly and a fairly high waist will give it that kind of classic feel, pretty much irrespective of what you do with the horns and the cutaways. And I also like my designs to feel like they have a really nice flow to them. And what I have found is that the thicker you leave the waist, the better the whole thing tends to flow together. So if you really pull that waist in, you can start to lose the flow, or it just looks a bit more busy from the belly up to the shoulders of the guitar. The other bit being the cutaways themselves, and the more you take out, the harder it is to come up with something that flows nicely with the top horn if you're going to do a top horn, and the busier the overall thing tends to look. we'll take this guitar as an example. So if I wanted to do something that is inspired by an existing design, what I'll start by doing is just taking a look at the original and deciding the things that actually give that guitar its characteristic design. So the fact that the original Les Paul has this really round belly, a fairly high waist, and it doesn't have that telltale cutaway like you do in something like a Telly. The top horn here attaches direct onto the neck, and obviously it's a single cut. And the bottom cutaway here is a completely different shape, but I do think that it still looks like it's inspired by a Les Paul because I've kept each of those things. I've also found that it's a really good idea to mock up all of the hardware after you mark your carve lines, but before you do them, particularly for the controls and for any pickup surrounds on the neck, because there's a couple of bits you could potentially get tripped up on. One of which is the distance between any cutaway that you've got here and the edge of your pickup cavity or your pickup ring, and the other is to make sure that the controls actually sit where you want them to sit once the carves are there. Okay, we are on to carving. Man, I love this part. I can't tell you how much I love this part of building the guitar, but actually regular viewers of the channel will probably know that I'm a real sucker for slab-sided and double-bound guitars. I love the way that that looks, particularly now that I've started doing wood binding on my guitars. I think it adds a really custom touch, but the plan for this one was to always do carves on the top of the body and probably a belly carve as well. And that's the reason that I've used a top and back, because that does give the effect of it being bound, double bound. I've also bound the neck, and it means that I can still do some nice carves on the top and on the back and retain that. Although I have decided that this design will definitely work as a slab-sided double bound guitar, it is a reimagined Les Paul, and I just think for this first one I should probably do something with some carves on. Let's give you a look. Hopefully you can see that. So where I've got the largest part of the carve just on the edge of the belly here, I'll make sure that I go deep enough so that I get some kind of reveal of the okame underneath the carina. Okay, let's get that done. Now I feel like I'm crafting something. I love this bit, I love it. Okay, something you get as soon as the carves are done is that you get this new sense of depth and perception and dimension that wasn't there previously, and it's something that you don't get with slab-sided and double-bound guitars. But the wood choices and the dimensions start to work together, the top and the sides of the guitar start to flow into each other, and if you're using figured or linear grained wood, there's this really beautiful effect that happens when the grain breaks over a carve or bevel line, that it immediately takes a detour and it highlights the lines that you've carved to. And that's actually now what you perceive as the new shape of the guitar rather than the actual outside dimensions, and I love doing that. So there's quite a few ways that you can change the actual look of a guitar by carving it. So I want to get the neck carved now so that we can pop it in and take a look, because we're pretty much there. Okay, it's pretty rough, but I think we're at the point where we can take a look. I'll give you a quick spin here and then I'll do some close-ups. So I am super happy with it. I love it. I think the balance between familiar and new works really well. I think it is quite obviously a reimagined Les Paul, which is what I wanted. It's got that vintage modern kind of vibe that I go for all of my guitars, and I think it looks still clean and simple and elegant. I've also done a stacked heel just here with plum and maple wood, which I think looks really nice. The maple's just used as pinstripes to go through the centre. You may think that there's not a huge amount of contrast between the woods, and that's true in the state that it's at currently, but as soon as I pop some finish on here, those woods are really going to separate, and there will be a super clean contrast between the two. And I cannot wait to pop some finish on here, but that's going to be for the next episode, as will the discussion on the hardware and the electronics and the pickups, so please do tune in for that. It won't be too long. So I will have a new episode of something soon, and for anyone who hasn't already done so, I highly recommend heading over to Sweet Tea Guitars, my friend Todd's channel, who is currently building his ultimate Telecaster, and that guitar looks fantastic. And as always, thank you so much for watching the video. I do really appreciate it, and all of the comments and support that you guys give me. So I will see you soon.